Joining us for today's webinar, Supporting Interpreters at IEP Meetings, Improving Family Participation. I'm Dr. Melanie Reese, Director of Cadre, and I'm joined by our Cadre staff, Noella Bernal, Kelly Rauscher, and Amanda Reinhardt. Today's webinar is being translated simultaneously into Spanish and into American Sign Language. To access the accessibility features, please follow these instructions. A few technical notes. All lines have been muted for this webinar. Please post questions in the question box, and the speakers will attend to them at points in their presentation and at the end of the presentation. We do ask that you do not post questions in the chat unless they're technology related, and this helps us to smoothly monitor the questions. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the presentations today. And thank you in advance for taking the time to respond to the survey at the end of this presentation. Your feedback is critical to Cadre's ability to continue to bring you webinars such as this one. And finally, this webinar will be posted and archived on Cadre's website. Cadre's efforts to support IEP and IFSP teams in effectively working together toward improving outcomes for children with disabilities has guided much of our activity over the years. We have been wanting to add to the field in the area of supporting interpreters for some time. We've been engaged in a search for high-value resources and practices and are excited to bring you two standout programs to light today. Today, we're going to hear from both Minnesota's Pacer Center and the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, or DESE, about their innovative approaches to supporting interpreters and improving family participation. Cadre has enjoyed and appreciated the friendship and collaboration of both the Pacer Center and DESE for many years, and we're delighted to turn the spotlight on their great work. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jesus Villaseñor, Hassan Sabatar, and Rachel Pearson from the Pacer Center, who will be followed by Brianna Higgins from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jesus Villaseñor. I am a parent advocate from Pacer Center, and I've been advocating for families for the last 29 years. This afternoon, I'm going to talk about one Spanish-speaking parent's experience at mediation that really got us thinking, and this is a true story, but I will tell it after I give Hassan and Rachel the opportunity to introduce themselves.
Well, thank you, Jesus. My name is Hassan Samantar. I'm also one of the parent advocates at Pacer Center, one of the multicultural parent advocates at Pacer Center, and I've been with Pacer 18 years now, working with the diverse communities here in Minnesota. Thank you. I'm going to turn over to Rachel to have an opportunity to introduce herself.
Thank you, Hassan. My name is Rachel Pearson, and Jesus and Hassan call me the new kid on the block because I've only been working as a parent trainer and advocate at Pacer for 9 years. I'm also the proud parent of 2 young adults with autism who have taught me so much over the years, and I'm still learning a lot from them every day. For those of you who are not familiar with Pacer, we are the Parent Training and Information Center for Minnesota, and we've been serving in this role since 1977. And with that, we're going to dive in. So we'd like to start off by sharing about the roots of the work that we're doing at Pacer Center to support interpreters in special education. Jesus is going to share the story of a Spanish-speaking parent who reached out to him in the middle of a difficult mediation process and how that got our wheels turning on this topic. Then Hassan will share a few anecdotes that are representative of a long history of parent experiences with interpreters in IEP meetings that parents have reported to Pacer advocates or that Pacer advocates have directly observed. And I'll speak to the funding support that Pacer receives from the Minnesota Department of Education to make this work possible. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Jesus.
Well, now we're going to the story. This parent received a boilerplate email from the Minnesota Department of Education, which stated in Spanish, quote, mediation is easier with a limited number of participants. The only participants who will be allowed to attend without prior notice are blah, 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 end quote. Now, the parent had not yet contacted her advocate at Pacer and did not understand that she could simply notify MDE and the school district that she planned to invite her advocate to help her at mediation, so she went alone. In Minnesota, the Department of Education allows the school district to bring an interpreter employed by the district to mediation, which is what happened in this situation. And the same district interpreter had interpreted a few meetings prior to mediation where the parents and the school could not agree on how to meet her child's needs. So the parent associated the interpreter with the school position and their disagreement because the interpreter was on the school payroll. After the first session of mediation, the parent was extremely hesitant to reach out to her advocate at Pacer because she was afraid that would be breaking the rules of confidentiality that she had agreed to as part of the mediation process. When we heard this parent story, we realized that even when the state education agency and the local education agency provide language assistance to parents in good faith and according to the law, parents who are English learners are still at a risk of not understanding their rights in the special education process and losing out on opportunities to participate and advocate for their child.
You know, we also realized that this one parent's experience at the mediation connected very powerful to our years of experience supporting parents in our advocate role at the special education meetings and witnessing the challenges that they often experience with interpreters. So I'm going to tell you a few stories that exemplifies, a few of these challenges that we see. In one meeting, where I was assisting a parent as their advocate, the interpreter was repeatedly, I noticed, repeatedly skipping over the interpreting the words like FAPE and LRE for the parents. When I called the interpreter out, they said, well, I'm sorry, I don't know what FAPE means. You know, and I told them, well, you need to ask. You have to ask if you don't know. You can't just skip those words that are very important. In another meeting, an interpreter did stop the discussion to ask the IEP case manager, what is this IOP that you guys repeating about? Not IEP, IOP. So imagine an IEP case manager in the middle of an IEP meeting pausing the discussion to provide a meaningful explanation of what an IEP is to the interpreter. In still another meeting, the interpreter suddenly stopped the interpreting and said to me, I'm going to sit this one out because I don't understand, this special education terminologies you guys use. So due to the urgency of that meeting, I was tasked with, fulfilling two roles: to interpret for everyone and also to serve as a, parent advocate. So it's important to understand too, a challenge that many parents in our community, the community that I work with, experience, which is that there is no way to meaningfully interpret special education terminologies because this vocabulary simply doesn't exist in a Somali language, which in Minnesota we have a large Somali and East African communities. And easily, there's no way to connect to their cultural experiences. And it's also important to recognize that many IEP case managers have not received any trainings in how to work effectively with interpreters in IEP meetings. And that has an impact on the potential for understanding and collaboration, of course. And on top of that, what we are seeing now in Minnesota is that the current staffing crisis has resulted in districts relying more heavily on a language line and other contracted interpreting services, which just magnifies this challenge even more. So I'm going to turn over to Rachel.
Thank you, Hassan. Pacer Center is very fortunate to receive funding from the Minnesota Department of Education through a grant called Parent Training and Information on Special Education Dispute Resolution Processes. Jesus and I co-coordinate this grant, and Hassan is part of our team of advocates involved in completing activities for this grant. So we thought a lot about the stories that you just heard from Jesus and Hassan, and we brainstormed how we could create useful resources for 3 specific populations in Minnesota who are impacted in very different ways when interpreters are involved in special education meetings. So number 1, parents who are English language learners and have children with disabilities. Number 2, the interpreters who facilitate communication for all participants in a special education meeting. And number 3, school district staff who rely on interpreters to implement effective language assistance to parents. And we're going to give you a flash tour of these resources now. So for parents, Pacer Center developed a series of videos in Spanish, Somali, and Hmong. Each video is narrated by a real parent with a message for other parents of children with disabilities. And we're going to play one of them for you. It's under 2 minutes, and it's captioned in English so that we can all appreciate the message. So, Noella or Melanie, wonderful. If you could play that video for us now.
maadaama ilmahaygu dibadhac leeyahay waxaan xaq u leeyahay inaan hadlo dugsigana waxaa ku qasban inay luuqadeeda igula hadlaan habku sidaa buu shaqeeyaa ma leedahay ilmo dibadhac leh weligaa ma heshay waraaqo iskuulka ka socda oo aadan fahmin macnahooda weligaa ma ka qayb gashay kulan looga hadlayo ilmahaaga oo aadan fahmin weydii qof turjumaana in lagu keeno si aad ilmahaaga ugu hadasho dugsigu waa inuu ogaado aqoontaad ilmahaaga u leedahay adna waa inaad ogaato adeega ilmahaaga loo fidinayo dabadeed si wada jira waxaad go'aan gaari kartaan habka ugu wanaagsan ee ilmahaaga wax lagu baro haddii aadan haysan akhbaarada iyo macluumaadka ee dugsiga adeegyada uu fidiyo ilmahaaga codkaaga dhiibo oo weydii haddii uu dugsigu haynin akhbaarada ay u baahan yihiin ee ilmahaaga ku saabsan codkaaga dhiibo oo weydiiso qof turjumaana oo idinka caawiya xiriirka sababtoo ah dibudhacu waa wax ilaahay keeno oo ilmo walba saamayn kara ilmaheenu waa muhiim waalidiintuna luuqado badan oo kala duwan ayay ku hadlaan wax su'aalo haddaad qabto la soo xiriir hay-adda Pacer Center telefonkeedu waxa weeyaan 952-838-9
Thank you so much, Melanie, for helping us show that video. I am going to now turn it over to Jesus, who's going to talk about our annual training for interpreters.
So, for interpreters, we developed an annual training which will be facilitated in August for the 3rd year in a row. This training is specifically designed for school interpreters working with families who speak a language other than English and have children with disabilities. We develop content of this training to focus on helping parents learn about the language access law that makes the services required, sharing strategies with them for supporting parent engagement in special education meetings, and having frank conversations about ethical considerations when interpreting for parents and school staff. We created a format for this training which places a heavy emphasis on open-ended discussions. We also prioritized offering it in person, which makes it easier for us to protect the privacy of the stories that interpreters share during the training. In the first 2 years of this training, we have discovered that it is very cathartic for interpreters. We also learn from interpreters who attend every year, and they consistently share experiences of feeling undervalued in their work.
So to highlight what Jesus just spoke about, I can tell you that Somali interpreters sometimes refer to themselves as the firefighters, based on their experiences with the school district, calling on them only when there's a, emergency purposes, when there's only a problem. And this was a part of our motivation to create a checklist for school staff with the specific action steps that they can take to work more effectively with interpreters. Do you mind, could you click on the hyperlink on this slide, please? Okay, thank you. So this checklist is based on best practices in the profession and includes steps that the school staff can take to plan well in advance for special education meetings with interpreters, and steps that the school staff can take immediately before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting as well. These steps are designed to help school staff feel confident in using the services of an interpreter effectively so that all the members of the IEP team can have a truly collaborative discussion with the parents of students with disabilities and their special education meetings. At the end of this checklist, we also included an explanation of the very different roles of a translator, interpreters, cultural liaisons, and advocates. And finally, we added links to additional resources from MDE, Cadre, and OCR for school staff to easily reference, along with the contact information for the Community Engagement Office of MDE, Minnesota Department of Education. Thank you. Now we can go on to the next slide.
So we want to emphasize that an important factor which supports our ability to develop and promote the resources we just shared with you is Pacer Center's strong collaboration with the Minnesota Department of Education and local education agencies in our state, going back many, many years. So I'm going to highlight a few examples. MDE has hosted a panel of Pacer advocates as a part of their workshop series for cultural liaisons and interpreters. And my colleagues, Jesus and Hassan, have been featured on the panel for over a decade. MDE also features a link on their website to Pacer resources on working with interpreters in special education meetings. Pacer sends an annual message to the special education directors for every public school district in the state, promoting our interpreter training and the resources we offer parents and school staff. And throughout the school year, cultural liaisons and interpreters employed by local education agencies across the state call Pacer advocates with questions about special education. And as I explained earlier, the video series for parents, the annual training for interpreters, and the checklist for school staff that Pacer has developed are all made possible with funding from the Minnesota Department of Education. Now I'll turn it back over to Jesus. Oh, Jesus, you're on mute.
You're muted.
After 3 or 4 years, I have still yet to master this button. Anyways, data from the Pacers. We're happy to report that the evaluation data from the first 2 trainings that we have facilitated for interpreters is very strong. 25 interpreters have participated. 100% reported that they increased their knowledge of language access laws. Over 90% reported that they increased their understanding of how interpreters can appropriately and effectively support parent engagement in special education meetings. And over 90% reported that they increased their awareness of common ethical considerations when interpreters are involved in the special education meetings.
We thought it would also be helpful for you to hear some of the comments that the interpreters shared with us on their evaluations, so I'm going to read a few. I was glad to hear the multiple interpreting issues shared by other interpreters, not only in my own native language, but with other language unlearned ideas from other interpreters. Loved all the resources shared today. I would like to thank you for the checklist, for the school staff. I appreciate that information to share with them to make sure they know that there are rules that they should follow. They will help me to remind them that I do not invent the rules they need to follow. So, and here are a couple more. I enjoyed the examples that I heard. It was helpful to know what other interpreters do and words that they use to help the school learn how to use an interpreter and help families get the information they need to understand the process of special education. Thank you for this opportunity. Please consider offering more frequently. Now you can hear a few common threads in these comments, like interpreters benefit greatly for opportunities to share their experiences and learn from each other. Creating useful tools for interpreters and school staff is vital, and interpreters want more trainings for special education meetings. I'm going to turn over to Rachel now.
Thank you, Hassan. Before today's webinar, Jesus, Hassan, and I took some time to reflect on current challenges to the work that Pacer Center is doing in this area and the lessons we've learned over the past couple of years. And we thought it would be helpful to frame our reflections in terms of what has changed and what remains the same. As you are all probably aware, on March 1st of this year, Executive Order 14224 was issued by the current administration, which in one fell swoop designated English as the official language of the United States and revoked Executive Order 13166. Just to jog our collective memory, Executive Order 13166 had been issued under Clinton in the year 2000 and had required every federal agency to develop a plan for providing meaningful access to federally funded programs and activities for persons with limited English proficiency. So persons we would say today are English language learners. Teaching interpreters about the significance of Executive Order 13166 was an essential part of our annual training. So the news that it was revoked really threw us for a loop. But as we've considered how to make thoughtful updates to Pacer's third annual training for interpreters, we plan to lean heavily on what remains the same. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is still the law of the land, which prohibits any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance from excluding any person in the U.S. on the ground of race, color, or national origin. And IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is still the law of the land, including its parental consent provisions. In other words, the fundamental protections for parents to language access and informed consent in the special education process stand strongly in place under federal law. And these laws are still the heart and soul of our annual training for interpreters. Pacer Center is also going through a very exciting change in our ongoing commitment to make our online presence much more accessible and useful to parents and professionals in Minnesota. Next month, Pacer will launch a brand new website. And this means we're going to be totally reconfiguring how we reach and deliver resources of value to parents who are English language learners and to the interpreters and school staff who support them through the special education process. What will not change is that our mission continues to guide our work. Every day, we strive to help parents of every language in Minnesota actively participate on their child's IEP team. Something else that will not change in the foreseeable future is that the need for information, trainings, and resources that help parents and school staff to confidently and effectively use the services of interpreters at special education meetings exceeds our capacity to meet it. And we want to emphasize that this reality is not disheartening to us. In fact, it energizes our work. And we are very grateful that our grant from the Minnesota Department of Education continues to fund Pacer's work in this area. Jesus, I'll turn it back over to you.
So, and to conclude our presentation, we'd like to outline what we are envisioning at Pacer Center for our next steps. We plan on creating a new access to information, trainings, and resources through a playlist of videos on Pacer Center's YouTube channel. In response to feedback from interpreters, we have attended our first 2 annual trainers. We are going to initiate a periodic virtual forum for cultural liaisons and interpreters to meet and share stories from the field and connect to advocates for information about special education and tools for IEP meetings. And to maximize our efforts, we will be seeking collaborations with other organizations who also support parents in Minnesota's diverse language communities.
I want to take this opportunity to express our thanks to everyone here today for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing from you during the Q&A. And thank you, Kadri, for bringing us all together to share ideas and learn from each other on this important topic. And now it's my privilege to turn things over to Brianna Higgins from Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here with you today. I'm going to share the work that Massachusetts has been doing in this area for the past about 3 years. We started, well, it's been a little bit longer than that, but I'm going to take you on a history lesson from when we started up till now, how we got here and where we're going next. If you could advance a slide, please. Thank you. So the purpose of this element of my work is to expand and improve language access services for families in schools. We're going to cover today our district guidance for spoken language interpretation, our interpreter training courses, how we started and how we brought that to scale, approved providers, our impact and feedback, challenges, and next steps. Advance, please. Thank you. So starting with a little bit of background, after Massachusetts had heard a lot of the stories that the Pacer Center shared about their families and the difficulties families had interacting with interpreters who were not familiar with special education terminology, school buildings that may not have been familiar with the difference between a professional interpreter and a bilingual individual. A 2018 Massachusetts law established a school interpreters task force to develop recommendations to train interpreters for the education setting. So there's a lot of advocates here that made this law possible. They did that. They published the recommendations in 2019. That task force brought together parents, advocates, professors, interpreters, a lot of really knowledgeable people in the field. And they put forward those recommendations in 2019. In 2021, the Massachusetts legislature allocated $1 million in funding to DESE over 3 years, over 3 fiscal years, to expand language access in alignment with the task force recommendations. So essentially, we had this funding and we had 3 years to implement what was in the task force recommendations. So in school year 22-23, DESE and a partner, we contracted with a partner to develop and pilot 3 tiers of coursework for interpreters in the education setting. This is one bullet point that is a huge amount of work. And so I'm happy to go into that if anyone has specific questions about how that actually happened. But I will show you in future slides exactly what our content is on our training. We had our vendor write out scripts. We had them do videos. All of those scripts were vetted by stakeholders on the task force, as well as our internal DESE staff that were experts in those content areas to make sure everything was accurate before we finalized this. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so at the end of that process, we released district guidance. As a state agency, we can release guidance. These are recommendations. They are not requirements because they're not in regulations, but we are heavily supporting our districts in implementing this. So this is guidance for the provision of trained interpreters in schools. So our recommendation is to establish a tiered system to allocate various levels of trained interpreters to meetings depending on the content. So more specialized meetings would require interpreters with a higher level of training and experience. So you can see this triangle here. This is a graphic that we created that essentially showcases the guidance that we're saying. Tier 1 is a language ambassador. We specifically are calling them language ambassadors and not interpreters because they haven't received, they haven't gone through any kind of proficiency assessment to determine their level of skill in the language, and they haven't received specific training in interpretation. So essentially, they are a self-proclaimed bilingual individual and not an interpreter. So we wanted to make sure there was a distinction between the two. So our tier 1 language ambassador training, I'll show you that in just a minute. Then you have our demonstrated language proficiency. That leads you up to tier 2. So a tier 2 interpreter has professional interpretation skills in the school setting and in general is focused on the general education setting. Then getting up to tier 3, you have an additional professional experience. You have more time as an interpreter practicing those skills, and you have advanced interpretation skills and training in specialized settings, specifically special education settings, IEP meetings, disciplinary hearings, ELE placement meetings. All of those meetings with a legal context would require a tier 3 interpreter. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is just continuing. This is kind of what our district guidance looks like. Thank you to Cadre for putting that into the chat so you can read through it. We also provide a federal basis for language interpretation services. We use the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which Cadre also utilized. IDA and really relying on the requirement that school districts provide a trained interpreter, and that the use of students or teachers or families as interpreters for another family is unacceptable. Next slide, please. So here's our language ambassador training. Language ambassadors, we have defined them as bilingual staff members who have basic knowledge of interpretation or basic proficiency in the target language. These people may be used in informal or spontaneous settings. These individuals generally hold dual roles in a school. So this could be someone that sits in the front office, a clerk, a para, a teacher, any of those sorts of things that maybe they get on the phone with a parent, or a parent calls and they're speaking a language other than English and they want to ask about the field trip, or they want to know what time does school get out today, it's an early release, anything like that. Those language ambassadors can interpret for the family in those situations. So this is a 60 to 90 minute self-guided training. It's meant to train two different populations. One is the language ambassador, the bilingual individual I just mentioned, and the second are school-based staff members who would be present in meetings with an interpreter. So we find this to be extremely important. And we emphasize this in our guidance that any school-based staff member, even if they are monolingual, should be taking this training, because they are going to learn what is the importance of an interpreter, what is the legal basis for interpretation in schools, why is this so important for our families, why do families have the right to it, and why is it so important for them, and also how to interact with families and an interpreter when there's an interpreter present. Even basic things like look at the family when you're speaking and not the interpreter, to monitor your pace, to try to speak in plain English, all of those sorts of things that help staff members know, how am I going to work in one of these encounters. Next slide, please. Before I go on to the slide, could you please click on the link or show the link for the language ambassador training onto the screen? Could you show that link or share that link live? I'm not sure if it's coming. I see it in the chat. I was hoping you could share it up on the screen, and if not, that's fine. We can just go back to the slides.
I think she's probably working on it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm having some difficulty. Go ahead and go on. I'll try to get it up there for you.
Okay, no worries. So I was just going to showcase what this looks like on our website. You can click on the language ambassador training. Anyone can use it, anyone on this call. If you want to share this amongst your colleagues, stakeholders, families, staff members, anything like that, can certainly able to use this language access. It's a free and open resource. It is specifically tailored in some cases to the Massachusetts context. So, it might have something along the lines of, I remember it might say something about Massachusetts graduation requirements, for example, but the vast majority of that is pretty universal. Thank you so much. So if you scroll down, you can click on the start here if that's something that you're interested in. And then if you scroll down, you'll just see some of the content that's in this language ambassador training, introduction to interpreting, the educational school system and the tier system, the code of ethics and standards of practice. We have cultural responsiveness in there, interpreter skills, collaborating with interpreters. These are all the different topics that are in there. And we've also released guidance on how to utilize this particular resource. Thank you so much. You can go back to the slides. We've released guidance on exactly how to utilize that resource. So you can do it self-paced, you can do it completely on your own. You can do it in a group setting. If there was, a whole assembly, a back to school assembly or something like that, you can put it up on a projector. You can do it in pieces in a little PLC if you had smaller meetings and as a staff. Okay, so moving on to interpreter in the education training, this is tiers 2 and 3. So in formal meetings with families, we tell our districts and schools that they need to provide a trained interpreter for families who are not proficient in English. Tier 2 interpreters have demonstrated proficiency. I have a chart here that just gives the skills and competencies of tier 2 and tier 3. And interpreters can be trained in a variety of ways. And I'll talk in a couple of slides specifically about how interpreters can be trained and what that certification looks like. It is strongly recommended, though not required, that our districts use interpreters who have been trained through a DESE approved course. This is kind of how we're trying to create a baseline of interpreter skills and content knowledge that we feel is important for the education setting. So we are recommending that for anyone who uses even a contracted interpretation service, ask their employees, do you provide training specifically for the education setting? Do you provide training in special education terminology? If you are getting feedback from families or staff members that you don't think the interpretation is accurate or adequate, then you can certainly ask those contracted service providers to take the training through DESE. Next slide, please. So this is our content, our tier 2 and tier 3 content. On the left, I know it's really small, you can't really see it, but that's the code of ethics and standards of practice for educational translators and interpreters of spoken languages. So all of our content is grounded in this, the code of ethics and the standards of practice. This answers a lot of those really difficult questions. And we've also found that interpreters really enjoy the sessions where they have a class, they're going to this class, they're going to this training, they're making connections with each other, they're talking to each other saying, has this ever happened to you? Have you experienced this? And, you know, there's often a lot of universal experiences that they might not have connected on. They will talk about, well, I don't know what to do if I'm called to interpret in this situation and I have no idea what that language is, or I'm called to interpret in so-and-so and they're starting using terminology that I don't understand. And so we talk all about that code of ethics and that standards of practice, that this is a profession, and to make it really professional and meet your obligations to the families, that it is important for you to be both prepared for the encounter that you're with, to be intellectually honest with your superior and which encounters you're taking on what do you feel prepared to do and what do you not feel prepared to do, and to also say, you know, the interpreter needs to pause here and ask for clarification, or the interpreter needs to pause and look up this word, to make sure that no words are being skipped that would be really important for the family to know. So just looking at this tier 2 content, you'll see that it's really focused on the general education content. We have basics of interpreting, glossary development, public education in the US and in Massachusetts. You know, we know that there's a lot of interpreters that serve in our schools that did not attend school in the United States. They might have attended school in another country. So we go over what public education is like here so that they can be a really good advocate for families and better understand the system. English language programs and services, student support teams. So, you know, what are student support teams in schools? You're going to hear those terms a lot. And then MTSS systems. And in tier 3, you'll get into, again, English learner programs and services. We get a lot deeper into that terminology, IDA and eligibility, disability categories, cultural perceptions of disability, the IEP process. Again, really specific skills and content that interpreters would need for all of these particular settings. Next slide, please. So initial rollout, how did we roll this out initially after development, and what did we learn? So Language Ambassador, it's easily accessible on the website. We advertised it through both the DESE guidance, which is on our website, and the Commissioner's weekly newsletter. The Commissioner puts out a weekly newsletter. It's through email. Every superintendent gets it, and basically anyone else who would like it can sign up as a subscription service. So it went out through there. Tier 2 and 3 training, we piloted the courses first with a small number of districts. Participants were offered a stipend to participate and provide feedback when they were finished. We also offered the course at no cost to district employees for 3 semesters. So as a state agency, we paid the vendor directly to run a certain number of these training courses, and interested individuals filled out this Google form, and then we selected them based on qualifications and district needs. So districts who had the highest percentage of families who spoke a language other than English were prioritized for this training. Some of the feedback that we learned, the pilots were essential for the final product. We learned a lot from feedback from these pilots that led to tweaks and changes within the training course itself. And then offering the course to participants throughout the state was really hard to manage. So this was me getting this Google form. This could be anyone throughout the state. I got hundreds of people that were interested. I did not have that many slots. So I put them in. I also saw that, you're offering something to somebody for free and they don't necessarily have, a stake in it. There was a lot of people who dropped out or didn't attend consistently, which was a little bit challenging. And so I started to enroll twice as many participants as spaces available. Generally, we tried to keep classes to about 20. I started to enroll 40 to 50 people in each course, knowing that by the time you got to week 2 or 3, you'd actually be around 20 to 25 participants. So those are just some things that we learned up front. Next slide. So now how do we bring this to scale? So we have a system to approve providers of these training courses. We want to scale our training program so that as many individuals as possible within schools can access the training at little to no cost. We're not trying to make money off of this training. This is something that we are trying to bring to scale as easily as possible. So we released a master service agreement, an MSA, to create a list of approved providers of interpreter in the education setting training courses. So vendors can apply. This is Combis, our statewide procurement site. You can apply for one of 2 pathways. Pathway A is to become a provider of the DESE developed interpreter in the education setting training materials. So you would apply, say, what your experience is, training adults, working with interpretation, education, things like that. Proposed instructors will go through an instructor training, a pretty short instructor training course, and then will basically be handed all of the materials that we've created to run this course. Those providers can offer the course to any individual within their district, outside of their district. It could be an organization. The course can be offered for a cost, which, we have some organizations that do offer it for a cost. And then it can also be offered without a cost. We have some approved providers that are districts themselves that train their own people, and they're offering that at no cost to their own employees. In Pathway B, we actually don't have anybody approved on Pathway B yet, which is to submit materials to become a provider of DESE approved interpreter training. So here we wanted to allow a way for vendors, organizations that potentially had already developed training to train interpreters for the education setting to submit their own materials and say, hey, we've already done this. We don't want to use your materials. We want to use our own. And so we have a pathway for that. We actually haven't had anyone submit materials for Pathway B yet, but we do have it available. Next slide. In FY25, so this past fiscal year, $500,000 of that initial $1 million trust fund grant was awarded to 24 school districts through the Interpreter in the Education Setting grant. The allowable expenses on that grant were registration fees for individuals to complete Tier 2 or Tier 3 training, and provide a stipend to anyone who completed the training. So again, just giving that incentive for individuals who sign up to successfully complete it, because it is long. It is long, it is difficult, and we're really trying to raise the profession of interpretation. Next slide. Thank you. And here's our impact. Massachusetts has almost 400 school districts serving just over 900,000 students. In the last school year, 27% of students' first language was not English. That's the proxy we're using for a family who may require interpretation or translation. And generally, they're concentrated in a really small number of districts. So this is the completers that we've had, again, just since we rolled this out in FY22. The tier 1 training, that's the online training. We have almost 1,600 completers, about 32 different districts. The tier 2 training, we have 195. I actually just updated this before this webinar, so that should say the spring of 2024. But we have 195 completers of the tier 2 training. We have approximately 20 people, maybe a little bit more, still enrolled in that, and we'll be finishing up in June. About 42 different districts represented, sorry. And you can also see that I'm tracking the number of languages represented. So I know the top languages in Massachusetts, and then I'm tracking to make sure that all those languages are represented by our interpreters, which they are. And then tier 3 training, we have 37 so far. Number of districts, about 11, and then we have 3 languages there, which these are the top 3, 3 of the top languages in Massachusetts. Next slide. So we do solicit feedback in a couple of different ways. One, on the left side, we have an interpreter feedback form. So we put this up on our website. It's translated into, I think, 12 or 15 different languages, so that districts can just use this as a resource. We invite them to put it out at any encounter that they have that utilizes interpretation in their schools and ask their families for feedback. And then on the right-hand side, this is the course evaluation for the actual training that we do. So every participant is asked to complete this course evaluation, and it comes to me. So I don't have the numbers to share with you, but overwhelmingly we're getting that strongly agree rating across the board for the training, the content, the discussion, the interpretation skills, all of those sorts of things. It's being really well received, which is nice. Next slide. Challenges and lessons learned. I think I already touched on the first one. Participants need an incentive to successfully complete the course, either money or PDPs, sometimes both. PDPs are the professional development points that people need towards licensure. They might be called something different in your state. Assessing proficiency through work experience is important and can be a little tricky. We found that at first we said, if you have a note from your supervisor that basically says, yes, you can speak this language, whether it's proficiency in English or the target language, the instructors that we've used to train these courses sometimes have found that without an actual assessment, there have been individuals that just could not successfully complete the course. Their language skills were not strong enough to work as interpreters at the tier 2 or 3 level. And then developing the content, writing the scripts is very time consuming. So make sure you bring in a lot of experts from multiple different offices to review the material. Next slide. So here are our next steps. These are things that we are working on right now. First, we are adapting the course for ASL interpreters. So this whole training course is specific to spoken language interpretation. We are adapting it for ASL. It's actually, the pilot just finished, and hopefully will be available in the fall of 2025. What we found here was, although ASL interpreters are extremely well trained, and then there's already infrastructure for that, they don't always have the specific training on how to interpret between a staff member and a family in some of these really technical terms. At least 4 additional districts will become an approved provider of training for next school year, which is great. We're going to support districts in securing training interpreters from the statewide contract. So working on this right now, trying to figure out a way that our statewide contract that utilizes services like Language Line, Language Bridge, organizations like that, companies like that, we're trying to make sure that the employees that they use in Massachusetts schools have gone through training specific for the education setting. We're also embedding this interpreter training as an allowable expense in other school improvement and family support grants out of the state. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. Okay, I've reached the end. Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, thank you so much. That's so much information. It's pretty amazing. There are a few questions. So I'll go ahead and direct a couple of them to you, Brianna. There was a question about how long is the training?
That is a great question. So the tier 2 training is 8 weeks long. Just hopefully make sure I don't misspeak there, but it's 8 weeks long. It's 2 hours per week. And 2 of those weeks intentionally were built in as review and reflection weeks, so that if you didn't get through all the material one week, or you need some time to kind of fill in those gaps. And then tier 3, it's additional content. So that is actually 10 weeks with 2 weeks of review and reflect. And it's 2 hours per week of live class time with an instructor. It can be virtual or in person. Most of the time it's virtual. And then there is homework, which is typically practicing and recorded encounters that you send in to your instructor.
Okay. And just to follow up on your training, when school districts opt for training with their own staff, how are they paying staff for their time to complete the training? Another state released training modules to train ML staff to support interpreters, but dozens of school districts in that state are not using them because it's about 40 hours in total, and they don't have the funding to pay staff for the training.
Yeah, that's a good question. So districts can train their own staff members either through the DESE training. So some of them were in the early years, they went through their training that we provided for free. In the later years, they might be using the grant that we just put out to go to an external provider, and we are paying for that training. It's approximately $1,000 per person. Or districts who have a really high percentage of families who need interpreters and might have interpreters on staff can become the provider for themselves and then offer that training. Typically it's after work hours, so sometimes they just pay them the hourly rate to complete that training. Sometimes it's like 5 to 7, something like that.
Thank you. There are a couple questions around the Pacer Centers program. Regarding your videos, how do you host those, and how do you distribute them, and how do you use those videos that we showed in promotion?
Well, I can dive in, and then maybe Jesus and Hassan, you can add. Currently, those videos live on our website on a page dedicated to resources related to supporting interpreters who are involved in special education meetings, and resources for parents just to understand their rights to an interpreter, which is the message in those videos. So they live there, but Jesus and Hassan will tell you that generally our parents in our diverse language communities in Minnesota are not necessarily going to go to our website to find resources because it's primarily in English. So, and that's just not where they seek out information. And so we use social media to distribute. Hassan and Jesus can talk about how they do a lot of direct work with cultural liaisons and interpreters and local education agency, special education staff, the coordinator supervisor level, at the IEP case manager level. They do a tremendous amount of connecting to all of those people to the resource we have for the parents that they serve. And of course, they serve these parents directly too. So Jesus and Hassan, do you want to add to that?
Well, you're right in everything that you said, Rachel, and it's really through our more personalized advocacy with diverse cultural and linguistic diverse families when we do the promotion of our information, and also through our contacts with interpreters through the IEP meetings where we coincide. and it has taken us a little bit of time, and it's hard to find the time of the year and the time of the day where we can have a more important presentation. But we have decided, I mean, it would virtually would have more impact, but we would lose the part where we the interpreters get to interact with each other and listen at the maybe common denominator problems that they face. Many times even the even negative aspects of the job and how they feel that they are treated by the schools, frankly, about many times just not feeling, as I said in my part, not feeling that their work is valued, and feeling many times that they are just treated as a simple interpreting device, or a tool practically. So it's taking some time. There's a lot of turnover in that role, in those roles too, but we're trying our best.
And I think it's important too to think about in our next steps on this project moving forward. We're looking to really cultivate more collaborations with community-based organizations who serve diverse language populations in our state, so that we can maximize together, the resources that we've created for parents and the relationships that they have built with parents, so that we join together in ensuring that parents are hearing these videos and able to access these resources really, really easily and comfortably.
Yeah, for the community that I work with, in addition to that, what Jesus and Rachel said, fostering a relationship with the community centers, it's a great way to disseminate, whether it's for the families or the interpreters. In addition to that, if anything positive has ever come out from COVID, it's the fact that people now more and more are utilizing some social media platforms that are very successful, that they use for other daily living life. WhatsApp is another great place that I connect with, whether it's professionals working with the school districts, interpreters, or families. So there's a multifaceted way that I try to but the YouTube, Facebook, WhatsApp is a great thing, and to the point to where even sometimes, a lot of times, I would held presentations through those platforms easily.
Great, thank you. There were a couple questions that addressed, how to get this information, the cost of training. There was one specific: are there free programs that can provide bilingual staff working at parent centers or schools that would like to become certified interpreters to help support the mission? Do you have information about that?
I'll just note that our language ambassador training is free and available on the website. Again, we're careful to say that that's not a full training for an interpreter, but for those that are interested, just to kind of dip their toe in the water, get some initial training, that's a good free resource.
Great, thank you.
And
Rachel?
I was just gonna say that, yeah, the interpreter certification at the state level varies so widely by state, whether you're talking about educational interpreters or interpreters who work in the health sector. And so it's critical. Like in the state of Minnesota, we don't have a state licensure for educational interpreters. We do not have a state licensure for interpreters who work in the healthcare industry. But that is not true of every state. So it's important to look into that and find out what kind of structure there is already for those trainings in your state. It's very state specific.
Okay, thank you. And any of the panelists can answer this question. Can you speak to the written translation of IEPs? Can either of the presenters, the groups, share how or who does the translation of IEP documents?
Do this is a sticky wicket. This question. So I think I know. As you all probably know, the idea does not really speak very much to the translation of documents in the special education process outside of the prior written notice. However, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is very overarching and broad in the federal requirement to serve parents of every national origin. And so historically, the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Education have interpreted through a Dear Colleague letter that school districts do have a responsibility to translate what they termed vital documents. So vital documents that support the parents' participation in the special education process. And so, that's one of the resources that we share at our interpretive training, and we push that out to school districts, to local education agencies across the state annually, and we make that accessible on our website. That was in, I believe, 2002 that guidance came out, and the guidance was very specific in that Dear Colleague letter that while not every document, while not every evaluation report, progress report, IEP, prior written notice, it is not required to be translated. On the other hand, it is difficult to envision how a parent who is an English language learner could meaningfully participate in the special education process without being able to look back at their child's a translation of their child's evaluation, or without being able to look back and refer to their child's IEP. So there's this tension between in the lack of ideas speaking to this need, and then strong guidance from the Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Education to the need for school districts to translate vital documents for parents who are English language learners. We will see, if that guidance from 2002 is also peeled back at any point in in this administration, because they are working actively on examining documents that from the Clinton's administration that flowed from the executive order 13166. So we'll see where that lands. But I think in the meantime, as we spoke to earlier, informed consent and parent participation, parental consent in the IDEA statute is very, very strong, and the protections for language access in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VI, are very, very strong. And so I think that speaking as the Parent Training and Information Center for Minnesota, when a parent who is an English language learner comes to us and is struggling in the special education process, every day we will support their advocacy for translations of their child's special education paperwork. I don't know if Brianna, Jesus, Hassan, if you want to speak.
What I try to do systematically is every time I meet a new family, I read the IEP to the parents in Spanish, and try to answer all the questions that they may have that came up from the IEP, but at least to have an idea. Actually, starting with the evaluation, because it's just essential for them to understand the evaluation in order to, like Rachel said, participate more actively in the developing of the IEP. So I find that job that is very helpful for both the families and me as an advocate to know and prioritize what is going to be the strategy to follow.
You know, there's another angle to it when it comes to interpreting at the IEP. Earlier, with the presentation, you heard me saying that sometimes interpreting the IEP is not the most the best mode for communicating, especially the communities that I work with from East Africa, because a lot of the terminology, I would say, probably in my opinion, 60% or 50% of the terminologies that are in special ed, we don't have a terms for it. So it forces you as a translator to invent some terms, right? And may not be in harmony with the law. So it's a very tricky when we Department of Education here in Minnesota attempted to do the interpretation of the IEP, but I think it was maybe 12, 13 years ago. And it wasn't easy to do that. And and it turns out to be not even a cost effective, even if you put the cost there. I mean, you probably have a lot of terminology in order to convey that message and translate. If you don't have a term, you have to basically describe what that means or what it entails. So, at the end of the day, you'll realize that, a 5-page of IEP or 10-page of IEP will turn into 25 pages of a translation or 30, pages of a translation. So it's not, we notice that it's not the best interest for the family when we do an IEP documents that are, heavily terminologies that we don't have legal terms translating it. So there's a different angle to it. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Right, any other thoughts on that? It looks like we're getting close to the end, so I'm going to find my page here to get us back to the. There we go. Sorry, I lost my how to share. So I am so very grateful for the time that you've all spent doing this. This has been amazing. Thank you so much. As we mentioned at the onset, Cadre has curated resources to support interpreters from across the country. And we have housed those on our website, so they're available. Many of the resources that have been shared with you today, we've only shared 2 states. There's lots going on across the country. Check what's going on in your state and see if there are activities that you can be a part of if you're interested, and take some of these ideas back to your state leaders and see if you can bring some of them to bear in your own world. So. But here are the resources that we have found. You can find them on our website under the 4 Families tab or under our 4 Districts tab, or directly by following this QR code. We want to remind you of our 10th National Symposium on Dispute Resolution in IDEA coming up this October. Registration opens soon. We hope to see you in Portland, Oregon this fall, so please keep that on your radar. And as we've mentioned before, please fill out the evaluation. Your feedback is very important to us. Please click on the link in the chat to fill out the very brief survey evaluating today's webinar. We would greatly appreciate it. If you want to learn more about what's coming up from Cadre, you can subscribe to our newsletter or find us on Facebook and LinkedIn. And thank you, Hassan, Jesus, Rachel, Brianna. You've been amazing. This was rich and informative. Appreciate your time and your graciousness in sharing all this information. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We wish you all a wonderful summer. Take care, everybody.